Hey, it's Nora. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about presidential pardons, specifically whether President Donald Trump is going to pardon his former associates, Michael Flynn, Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort.
Are you considering pardoning Paul Manafort?
I have great respect for what he's done.
That's not quite an answer, but he was asked about it again in an interview this November, when he said, and I'm quoting here, "It was never discussed, but I wouldn't take it off the table." Why would I take it off the table? Now, that comes after the New York Times reported back in 2018 that the president's then lawyer, John Dowd, floated the idea of pardons to Flynn and Manafort's lawyers while special counsel Robert Mueller was preparing his case. Dowd denied that report, but is that legal? Is dangling a pardon to someone involved in the Russia investigation obstruction of justice? Let's get into that. To start with, the presidential pardon power is granted in the U.S. Constitution. It's Article 2, Section 2. He shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. Now, against the United States refers to federal charges. Rabbit hole. Legal scholars have traced the idea of rulers being able to pardon criminals back to England in the 600s AD. In much more exciting legal language than we have today, a law said, "If anyone fight in the king's house, be it in the king's doom, whether a criminal shall or shall not have life." The idea migrated to the US with the colonies, and eventually it was included in the Constitution. Today, it's understood to cover not just absolute pardons, but also commutation of sentence. Modern presidents have used their pardoning power a lot, and some of those were really controversial. For example, Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon.
My conscience tells me it is my duty not merely to proclaim domestic tranquility, but to use every means that I have to ensure it.
That was unique because it was a preemptive pardon, given before Nixon was ever charged with any crime, and it was a blanket pardon for any crime in an almost 5-year period. In a hugely publicized move, President Jimmy Carter commuted the sentence of heiress Patty Hearst for armed bank robbery. President Bill Clinton controversially pardoned financier Mark Rich in the final hours of his administration. Rich was convicted of a variety of fraud and financial charges. And President Barack Obama commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence after she was convicted of leaking classified documents to WikiLeaks. That decision ignited a huge controversy in the last days of his administration. So far, President Trump has already pardoned 7 people and commuted 4 other sentences. Those decisions actually tell us a lot about what could be coming next. His first pardon was highly political and also his most controversial. Former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who was convicted of criminal contempt of court in relation to hardline tactics against undocumented immigrants.
Was Sheriff Joe convicted for doing his job? That's what. I'll make a prediction. I think he's going to be just fine, okay?
Some of President Trump's pardons were more typical, like granting clemency to Alice Johnson, a 63-year-old great-grandmother who was serving life in prison for a nonviolent drug charge.
Alice, please.
But Trump has also pardoned other controversial figures, including Dinesh D'Souza, a right-wing author and filmmaker who pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations, and Scooter Libby, who is the chief of staff to former Vice President Dick Cheney and convicted of perjury and obstruction of justice. Let's look at those charges again. Contempt of court, campaign finance violations, perjury, and obstruction of justice. Sound familiar? Those are all charges that the president and his associates could face or already are facing. Some have suggested that these pardons were designed to send a signal that the president is willing to grant more pardons for similar charges. What's more, President Trump did not follow the normal protocol for granting these pardons. Rabbit hole. There's an entire bureaucratic process set up to help presidents with their pardons, called the Office of the Pardoning Attorney. Usually, lawyers in that office get a request from the public and review it. Pardons are typically used to right a wrong, pardoning an innocent person, or someone who has expressed remorse and changed, or to correct a disproportionate punishment for a crime, like mandatory minimums and drug sentencing. If the office decides to recommend a case to the president for a pardon, the Deputy Attorney General signs the recommendation and sends it to the White House. In his pardons, President Trump bypassed this entire system. He just decided who he wanted to pardon and then did it. That's not illegal, but it's against precedent, and it's raising eyebrows. Nobody is saying the president doesn't have the authority to issue these pardons, but to put it simply, even though his power is absolute, he still can't use that power to commit another crime. That brings us to obstruction of justice. That crime is defined as essentially an act that influences, obstructs, or impedes the due administration of justice. Here's how legal scholar Jeff Toobin explained it.
The pardons themselves, I think, are constitutionally protected, but the negotiations around them could well be evidence of obstruction of justice.
That's where the president's earlier pardons are important. Some interpret that they send a message that the president isn't above using the legal process to help people who are loyal to him. Legal experts say it doesn't take an explicit agreement, though, to get in trouble with the law. The president's hints and suggestions are open to interpretation, as is going through intermediaries, like his personal attorney Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani told the Washington Post back in August that the president had been asking him for advice about whether he could pardon Manafort and other former associates. Not only could that reveal something about Trump's mindset about pardons, but the fact that Giuliani said that to the Post on the record with his name is hugely significant, as is the fact that even after that interview, the president still said that a pardon wasn't off the table. Here's Maine Independent Senator Angus King.
He's dangling a pardon. He doesn't have to say, I'm going to give him a pardon. It's almost worse if he says, I'm considering it, it's not off the table, because that's a signal to Manafort, hold out, and you've got a good chance of getting a pardon.
Well, is that obstruction of justice?
I'm not going to give it a legal characterization, but I'd say it's very troubling.
Other critics of the president agree. They say his comments about pardons and his lawyer's comments about pardons could interfere with or impede the investigation, especially if a Trump associate took that as a signal to lie to investigators. There's no legal precedent, though, so it's not exactly clear. And that's where there's potential for legal trouble in the future. So is promising a pardon obstruction of justice? Hinting at one? Suggesting? Pseudo-signaling? That's all a gray area one Mueller will have to figure out. And that's probably more than you wanted to know.